Good morning. Hopefully you're well caffeinated. It's been a really interesting morning, I think, from my vantage point. By way of introduction, my name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm the Regional Sustainability Coordinator in the city of Boulder, Colorado. And if you wonder why Boulder and some of the communities that may seem far, far away from Maui and what's going on here, we can talk about that offline, but I think it's very interesting. By show of hands, how many of you were here at the conference last year? Oh, good, and you came back. That's a good sign. So I do want to start by echoing some of the comments that we've heard, and thanks to our sponsors, thanks to the rest of the planning committee. It's really an exciting thing for me to be part of this conversation, and this panel is, I think, going to be quite interesting as we move forward and think about how the conversation really continues to progress and how we get the ball across that line. So last year, we really focused on issues around the transforming energy system and the utility of the future and what that potentially looks like. And we thought very hard about this idea of shifting towards a more customer-centric approach. What does that mean? Normally, I think we consider ourselves consumers. Well, what's the difference between a consumer and a customer? I think there is a big difference, and we can spend some time exploring that. The mayor's comments earlier really resonated, I think, for me when he started talking about the impact of the island and how what happens here and what happens in other places around the world. But I guess I would just respond by saying, remember, we're all on an island, and so what happens in Boulder, what happens here on the Hawaiian Islands, what happens in Tuvalu in Australia, really does happen to all of us. And so we look to Hawaii as a good example of where things are headed and how we can learn from your experience here. So Boulder in particular is really focused on this idea of a customer-centric approach, really thinking about the utility of the future. And we've really kind of melded this into the concept of the 3 Ds, the democratization of energy, decentralization of energy, and decarbonization of energy. And I think when we look to the future, what we are trying to understand, is this going to be a slow progress that is an evolution, or is it going to be a revolution? That's a question, I think, for all of us to consider moving forward. So as I look to my right, I am really psyched about this panel because these 3 gentlemen, I think, have great perspectives and vantage points on these questions that we're discussing today. And I'm not going to read their bios. But actually, I have to pause for just a minute and take a sidestep. Doug did ask me to let you all know that Alan and Eric from the last panel had agreed to try to answer some of the questions that they were not able to address here on stage, and they're going to answer those and post them to the conference website. So if your question wasn't answered live, stay tuned, and I think it will be answered in short order. So back to the panelists, I'm going to start with John. I've long admired John's work from afar, really thinking about this role of democratization, and I believe he's going to speak about this specifically. But his work with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance has been really, really inspiring to me, and I'm honored to share the stage with him and, of course, my other colleagues. Looking across to Henry, I met Henry last year at the conference, and what really struck me about Henry is his unwavering focus on communicating this issue of clean energy and how customers really are taking a more active role in this dialogue. And so it's a really cool thing to share the stage with him as well. Last but not least, my friend David Freeman here. David, what do I say about you? I'm not quite sure. He said the less the better. I think we could probably add up our cumulative experience in this audience, and we would still fall short of David's experience in this room. And that's not an age issue, by the way. That's just an experience issue. I was really excited to have David join us. And last year, Hunter Levins, who's in the front row, we needed a white hat to her black hat. So we'll see how it plays out the rest of the day. So I do encourage you to look at the program, read the bios of these gentlemen, and again, I'm honored to share the stage with them. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to start by just asking each of you to just give a little bit of perspective on, from your vantage point, What's happening in this shifting landscape of the utility world, and what do we see happening with the role of the customer? Is it going to be better than today? Is it going to be worse than today? And how do we take a more active role in really helping shape the future of this energy issue? I'm going to, John, maybe ask you to start, and I'd be curious to have you talk a little bit about the work you've done in really defining this idea of democratization of energy.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I think it was delightful to hear you describe the work that you're doing in Boulder, and of course I've also been an admirer from afar of the work that's going on in Boulder in terms of the, as you mentioned, I'm from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and there's really no place better in some ways looking at taking full advantage of that local self-reliance opportunity when it comes to energy. But from my vantage point, what I see is this democratization of energy happening, and really it's all about taking full advantage of the technological transformation in the electricity system to distribute both the power and the economic benefits of the electricity system as widely as possible. And I think in some ways the best way to describe this is to in fact describe it as a contrast to what we have had in the energy system, which is a system of energy monopoly. And when we established the electricity system, when we built the first poles and wires and generating stations, we focused on building things bigger and centralizing them and capturing economies of scale. And it was a great way to guarantee that we could get reliable and affordable electricity. It was a great way to make sure that we could deliver that at a low cost for power, but that we would be willing to pay essentially any social and environmental cost for doing that. And that, I think, is kind of the lesson that we're learning about that model and how it impacts us now. But we're also learning, too, that the rules that we set up to establish that system, which made sense at the time, given the way that we generated power. I mean, you weren't going to do community-based coal power, for example, and that was one of the more economical ways to generate electricity, is that it wasn't only a system of rules, but we've now created a culture of energy monopoly. And there's a perfect example. I was recently invited to Tucson, Arizona, on behalf of some community organizations that are interested in accelerating their transition toward renewable energy. They're sitting on some of the best solar resource in the country, but their electric utility is 80% reliant on coal power. And at one of the meetings that I had, a representative of the utility was there, and was responding to my presentation about kind of the solar opportunity, and he essentially said, you know, you have to understand, we're a conservative entity. We don't do beta testing, we don't do innovation. That's not our culture, that's not, you know, the way that the rules are set up for us to act. And I think that's what has gotten us to this place where there's a lot of tension around the transformative opportunity of energy democracy and where we've been in terms of the rules and the culture around energy monopoly. And what I want to highlight then is that we are at this moment of fundamental change. You know, we're approaching 1 million homes across the United States that have solar on the rooftop. We've got smartphones that can manage your thermostat or your lighting from wherever you are. You know, smart appliances that can be scheduled to run at any time of day. You've got electric vehicles, and there's some great conversation earlier today about how those can be used not only to decarbonize transportation, but also to really support the electric grid. And ultimately, I keep coming back to, you know, Accenture, the consulting company, put out a report in December and said there's essentially $48 billion on the table over the next decade that utilities might lose in terms of revenue to distributed renewable energy and energy efficiency. And I flip that around and immediately think, well, that's the opportunity for the electric customer. That's their opportunity in terms of distributed energy, in terms of energy efficiency. And it really is all about our responsibility to figure out how do we change the rules to let that electric customer capture that opportunity.
Excellent, thanks. So I want to get into some more detail about some of the things that you've said, but I want to shift over to Henry and talk a little bit about, obviously a lot has happened in Hawaii since I last saw you here, and so your vantage point, I think, is really important to talk about what do you see happening and what's the customer's role moving forward here?
Well, first, I'm really excited to come back to this conference. Last year, I think this conference was the highlight of the year in Hawaii. And I want to focus a little bit on what Alan Oshima was talking about how cell phones have revolutionized the way we do business. I mean, the fact that you can go to the library and you no longer even need a copier there, you can just take a picture of what you're excited about. So cell phones have sort of taken on a role of themselves way beyond just telecommunications, just the phone service. And I think we're on the cutting edge of an energy revolution. The energy revolution is pictured traditionally along two separate paths. One path is the vertically integrated utility model that is being tossed out by NextEra. The other is a highly decentralized smart grid model that is not vertically integrated. I think there's a third alternative that often gets dismissed, and that's what I want to focus on. The third alternative is a fully distributed model. Amory and Hunter Levins did a beautiful book many decades ago on brittle power, showing the vulnerability of transmission grids. Smart grids, which will have a vast telecommunications overlay and a vast computer overlay on the existing electrical grid, offer a way of integrating a lot of renewables onto the grid, but also offer a way of attacking the grid. They can be attacked through physical attacks, such as at the PG&E substation in South San Jose, the Metcalf station, which was attacked in 2013 in April, and which took 27 days to fix, and which nobody has been held responsible for. And the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission pointed out that if the attackers had attacked 9 critical substations across the U.S., you could have blacked out the entire United States. Now, regardless of whether the number's 9 or 10 or 15, the point is, as we make more and more complex systems with more and more data points, there becomes greater and greater opportunities for attack, whether it's a physical attack in South San Jose or cyber attacks with knocking out nuclear facilities in Iran with the Stuxnet system, whether it's the attack against Sony, may have been by South Koreans, may have been done by someone else, whether it's the NSA saying that the Chinese can knock out the US grid through cyber attacks. The alternative is a distribution system which entirely focuses on buildings separate from the grid. It involves solar, batteries, using cars to power houses, using houses to power cars, using cell phones to keep track of it all, involves considering each house and each building as its own grid. And the role of the utility as we know it today would be to help each building and each customer maximize their own small smart grid without having ties, physical ties, through transmission lines to a central grid. Whether we do it through microgrids, as is being considered by Paniolo Power, whether we do it through models such as the Hawaii Island Energy Cooperative or Hina Power being proposed on Maui, there can be small microgrids or individual grids which offer far greater reliability, far greater resilience, and far less threat from being shut down through cyber or physical attacks. So I think that model has to be looked at as a viable alternative.
So Henry, what I think I hear you saying really amplifies this point of decentralization, not just as a tactic for customers to maybe wean off their reliance on the utility, but really to provide a benefit back to the utility in a way that provides some stability, whether it be through what you're talking about, cybersecurity issues or load balancing, and creating these nano or microgrids really becomes a real value proposition to the utility for customers to partner with.
Perhaps in the short run, but as you begin pricing how much you can get on a microgrid versus the danger of staying connected to the central grid, I think more and more of the microgrids and nanogrids would actually break their ties to the central grid. And the question then is, how can the utility become truly an energy service company, or if somebody else will step in for that role? Because many people will not want to handle all the technical aspects of their home system, but if it were monitored by an energy service company, then they could provide services and maintenance to really secure individual homes, individual businesses. I mean, imagine a high-rise in downtown Honolulu, 41 stories tall. You flush the toilet on the top floor, the water falls 41 stories, and nobody thinks about capturing the energy.
Good, thanks. We'll leave that to the imagination. So David, you've been working in this industry a long time. You have really seen a lot of transformation take place from your time at Tennessee Valley Authority and LIPA and Los Angeles. I'm really curious to hear your perspective on where we are now. Is this just another go, or is this majorly transformative right now?
Well, for the past 40 years, I've been playing Monopoly. The utility industry has had a monopoly. They talk about it being their customers. Wake up, folks. The world, the electrical world, has changed very fundamentally. They're not your customers. You don't own them anymore. And until you get that through your thick heads, you're going to be making mistakes. People want electricity, but there has been a fundamental change. They can buy it from Solar City. They can buy it from other new companies that are emerging and growing like hotcakes. So you've got to fight in order to get that business. But that danger is combined with the greatest opportunity this industry has ever seen, because the climate challenge is telling us that we can't keep burning oil and gas and fossil fuels, or we're going to cook. And the answer, the modern day Edisons have done such a great job in developing solar power and wind power and storage technologies, that we can have an all-electric America, an all-electric world, an all-renewable electric world. But we've got to start building it. And everything new must be renewable. So Hawaii Electric and the other utilities in this country have got a choice. They can either grow or die. It really boils down to that. And I heard this morning some good people mouthing the right words. But this world and Mother Nature is looking for action, not words. And the action has got to be that everything new has got to be renewable. And the action is that if you don't readily supply solar power to the roofs of your customers, Solar City will, or somebody else like that. And so the customers are now have real competition for the first time in the history of the electric power industry. And unless you fire all these green eye shades people that are dreaming up schemes to charge people more money because they go for solar, and replace them with sales folks that offer people efficiency services, rooftop solar, and compete for the business, you're going to die. But the beautiful thing is that you can double and triple your business if you get out and really promote electric cars and build the charging stations. And the utility ought to own the battery in the electric car as part of your storage system and reduce the price. I mean, we are at a time in the history of the electric power industry where it can double and triple in size, and over the next 35 years replace all the oil and gas we use and save the world, or it can keep up its defensive tactics. A football team that just has a defense team is never going to win. That's the electric power industry today. It has got to radically transform. It's got to get a marketing department in it that it's never had before. It's got to go out and be selling heat pumps to replace gas. And the very idea of replacing oil with LNG it's just like switching from Camels to Lucky Strikes. That is not the way that you're going to solve the climate change. Don't they realize that methane is 100 times as bad as carbon, and it leaks In LNG, you lose it when you freeze it and when you unfreeze it. The idea that you're going to replace the oil with natural gas, Mother Nature says, no, hell no, that's not a bridge. That is a bridge to hell, climate hell. And so that all the good words are not going to really matter unless your actions change. But the opportunity is there for Hawaii Electric to be 3 or 4 times as big as it is if it will just get with the revolution. The revolution is happening. It's just not on TV yet.
I knew there'd be some quotable moments on this panel, so that's great. So, David, I just want to kind of follow up and maybe spring off something that Henry said. You talked about a utility as a service provider, and then you kind of wove that into this idea that we have vertically integrated utilities that still have generation facilities, and so how do they make that shift from being kind of that buyer-seller relationship, I guess, to one that they are providing the services that their customers want? I'm curious, David, what do you think about that? Is that possible? Is it possible for the utilities
to change
shift?
the management? You really do. You've got to get people in there that want to sell, that have got enough sense to realize you do now have a connection with your so-called customers. Offer them efficiency services with on-bill financing like I did at TVA 40 years ago and built the equivalent of a nuclear power plant for a third of the cost. Offer them, compete with Solar City. Get contractors and offer to lend me your roof and put solar on their roof and go into the decentralized solar business yourself. We need the vibrant competition of the new players and the utilities all promoting the greater use of solar and wind power, and let's stop belly aching about whether you can have an all 100% renewable system. Of course you can. You just have to build the storage and integrate it with the solar and the wind. It's a great challenge for the engineers. They can do it. I lived through an era where the presidents of the utilities were saying, we can't clean up the air. We don't know how to build scrubbers. They cost too much, and the engineers were building them. The engineering prowess of the utility industry is great. We just need to get some managers that really have faith in their own engineers and understand the climate challenge is a challenge. If you don't want a mandate, you better do it yourself, because we want to live. We don't want this island to disappear because the oceans go up.
John, I'm not going to ask you to disagree, but what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to draw back from that. I'm just so intrigued with this democratization discussion that you've really been leading, and the paper that you've just released that I really think everyone in the audience should read, because I think it really starts to spell out how customers can play a more active role in this conversation. So going back to the same kind of question where we have this buyer-seller arrangement right now, how do you start to insert this conversation of democratization?
Well, I think that's really in some ways the fundamental question, because I see that playing out in different ways. There was an announcement just in the past couple of weeks about Green Mountain Power in Vermont, which is operating under that monopoly model, partnering with NRG, gonna build microgrids, put solar on customer rooftops, offer that whole suite of services. On the other hand, you have what's going on in New York with their regulatory process, where they're essentially saying, to the utility, you're going to be out of the business of doing distributed generation. We're not going to let you install it on your customer rooftops. You're not going to be allowed to own it at all. And I think both of those, in some ways, are somewhat attractive in the sense that they both get us to the ends that we want in terms of more renewables and taking advantage of the distributed technology. And I don't know that I have the right answer, but what I keep thinking about is that $48 billion opportunity, and my question is, who's going to benefit from that? When you have a shareholder-owned utility, they have a legal obligation to their shareholders to maximize that value, and that means that when they're going out and investing in distributed generation or storage or what have you, they're going to do it in a way that does that. And it doesn't mean that it will be incompatible with their customers' interest or with the democratization of energy, but it means that they have fundamentally an undemocratic decision-making process to get there. And so my question is there a way that we design the grid system, whether it's the way that they're going in New York or in Vermont or somewhere else entirely, that gives us the opportunity to have democratic political decision-making process that actually leads to an energy system that will get to those outcomes.
Could I comment on that? A utility can contract with the very same people that are installing the solar panels on the roof today. But they could finance it, and to the customer, they could compete with other. We need the vibrant competition of the newcomers in the field and the utilities if we're going to reach 100% renewable soon enough to save this planet from the horrible impacts of climate. In other words, it's time we started really believing the climatologists who tell us that we've got to go from where we are down to 0 greenhouse gases in the next 20 or 30 years. And it's going to take all the effort that we can get out of existing utilities and the newcomers competing with each other, everything new being renewable, and substituting electricity for oil and gas in the transportation sector, electrifying the railroads. We've got a huge, exciting, cost-effective job to do, and we need to get after it as though our lives depend on it, because they do. And there's not a whole lot of time left for theory. Right now, the technology is there. The new Edisons have invented the better mousetrap. We just better put it to use, or our grandchildren will really regret it.
So, yeah, Henry, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I totally agree up to a point with both of these speakers. The problem is it only takes one blackout to really experience disaster. Hawaiian Electric always said, if we had an island-wide blackout, it would make us look like a third world country. Then they had 5 blackouts, 83, 88, 91, 2006, 2008. They no longer say that. But when you make a smart grid and you allow computers to interface with all aspects of it, and you make a very, very complex system, we all remember those copiers, printers, multiple things where one part goes, the entire system goes. The grid becomes vulnerable to physical or cyber attacks. Therefore, you have to either be able to island many different parts of the system or actually break them off. Allow hackers to attack the large system. The small systems will remain on. Cyber attacks are mounting. We all know of tens of millions of passwords being stolen. It becomes routine in the newspapers about how systems are being hacked. The electric grid, we need to move it to a realm where we can survive the first hacker that comes along and destroys the system.
So Henry, let me push back a little bit and say I don't disagree with you, but what I'd like for you to maybe describe is how do you start to bridge what you've just described into this full energy transformation that really needs to happen, and that's what David's talking about. It's not just electricity, it's natural gas, it's our liquid fuel. So how do we make that transition that really gets us on a path off of fossil fuels altogether? How do you weave in what you're describing in terms of cybersecurity and making sure that that's synergistic with that path?
What we would propose is an energy service company that comes along and says, Hawaii has 5 transmission grids. North America, Canada, the mainland 48 states, and northern Mexico have 3 transmission grids. We can experiment here. We can take an island or a region of an island, Hana, Puna, some area, and say, let's walk in with an energy service company and say, let's see what rooftop systems we can put on for solar, for wind, what battery systems we can put in, what electric vehicles we can put in, and actually take a community off the grid. And then compare the reliability and the cost for those customers versus those who stay connected to the grid. And also look at the relative impacts and threats to both. We have an opportunity to test different future models with our island grids. Or we could do what the utility is saying, is interconnect them all, and then we have only one, and we lose the opportunity to test the different futures that are possible. And remember, 20 years ago, with the cell phones, the future that we have today was not even envisioned 20 years ago. So the future solution may be something that none of us are thinking about, but we don't want to adopt a system that precludes the future from occurring?
My good friend, society can recover from a blackout. Society can never recover if we don't stop the greenhouse gas explosions continuing and we don't get it down to zero. There is an existential threat to life as we know it, and that's climate change. And unless we devote ourselves to replacing the fossil fuels with renewable electricity, as though our lives depended on it any way we can, then you either believe the climatologists or not. You know, we've had a blackout is a pretty threatening thing. I was at the Federal Power Commission in the 60s when we had the first blackout. Well, one of the impacts of it was that the birth rate went up 9 months later. I mean, you know, we recovered. You know, I am sick and tired of this country living in fear. Let's start living in hope and in the fact that this country is still capable of doing something really big. And building a whole new energy system on renewable energy is a wonderful, exciting opportunity that we ought to embrace, and we ought to go about doing it the best way that we can. I don't completely dismiss your things, but I think it's a far lesser threat than the climate issue, and we need to focus on building the technologies we got, and we need the competitive effort of the existing utilities, the newcomers in the field, and individuals, everybody going about it as hard as we can, and we need some new policies. For example, it's been economic to electrify the railroads in America for a long, long time. It hadn't happened because nobody has had the vision, the understanding that we've got to do it for survival. Now, that's on the table. Let's talk about what the politicians are not even talking about. All they've been talking about, Obama and everybody, is the electric power sector. But the major source of greenhouse gases is oil and gas. We've got to transform the transportation sector and even aircraft. We need to get after it, and we need to go about doing it the best way we can. You know, I'll accept another blackout or two, but I will not live in my 89th year without really agitating for us getting after the climate problem in a way that the politicians are not even proposing. You know, and it's up to us to help the young people of this country mount some programs that maybe one of these days we can get the political leaders to implement.
So, John, I know you want to comment on this, but I want to just look out to the audience and say, get out your little pieces of paper and start scribing your questions, because I want to make sure we leave enough time to let these guys start answering your questions. Otherwise, I'm going to make some stuff up. So, John, you want to respond to this or jump in?
Yeah, I would. I think it's important to. I mean, there's sort of two thoughts I had during this flow of conversation. One is that, you know, we do have a climate crisis that, you know, motivates us to move in toward decarbonizing the electricity system and beyond that as well.
More than carbon.
And we need to do it in a way that is very quick. And that leads a lot of folks to say we need all of the above in terms of solutions. And yet at the same time, when I look at the way that we have made progress so far, and I keep coming back to that question, that very important phrase, follow the money, which is who's making the money doing it a certain way to meet the goals that we've had. And so I give, for example, in Minnesota, we have a renewable portfolio standard like many other states. And what we essentially do is we cede the authority to the incumbent utility to figure out how to do it when we have a renewable portfolio standard, which means in the case of Minnesota, it was mostly utility scale wind power projects and new transmission lines that were built in order to accommodate that new development. And I think where we've come since we implemented that in the 90s is a realization that we can have a much more distributed energy system and spread around the economic benefit of that system a lot more. Absolutely. And I think, so I guess what I'm saying is that maybe I don't envision necessarily, and maybe I lack the vision, to see that 20 years from now we will be looking at individual islands, micro, nano power grids. But I think that the way that I see it is that we know that we need to be moving in both directions, toward renewable and toward decentralized. And decentralized accomplishes any number of things. It breaks up the political power of utilities, who we know use their economic strength in order to get policies set up in a way that favors them. It breaks up their monopoly over power generation, which can be both a security and a resilience issue. And it also spreads out the economic benefits of the renewable power opportunity. So I see us, inevitably we need to move in that direction because it serves all of those interests. And how far we go and what the shape of that system is, I don't know. But all I know is that we do have to change the rules that right now give the incumbents so much power over the way that system develops.
So I think we'll start getting some questions up here shortly, but let me just kind of pick up on this thread a little bit. So in Colorado and in Boulder, we are in this process of trying to create our own utility. We are going through the process of buying an old distribution system. Why? Because we want to get into the business of owning power poles and wires? No. Because right now we are served by a regulated monopoly and we are part of a homogeneous system. If we want anything different, if we want to create our own destiny, we have to go through this process. So my question, I guess, comes back to the role of the customer. How is it evolving? I think utilities typically say, well, my customer is happy as long as their beer is cold and their lights turn on. What we're hearing from you all is, well, wait a minute, there is value by being a customer, by being able to partner with your utility in a much more meaningful way. Is that true, or do you think we're still going to be in this buyer-seller relationship?
Well, let me give a Hawaii-specific example. With the proposed NextEra merger with Hawaiian Electric, it may be that it's in the public interest for HECO to be acquired by NextEra. But that doesn't mean that it's in the public interest for MECO or HELCO to be acquired by NextEra. Because there are 3 separate franchises, and they're all applicants before the Public Utilities Commission merger docket, which means they could each go different ways depending on what their communities feel. And so all communities could be driven by the emphasis to get dealing with climate change really quickly. And they could all be for moving towards renewables really quickly. But one might be that the public interest is staying with HECO, with HEI. One might be the public interest is going with NextEra. And one might be the public interest is co-ops and microgrids. And the fact that they're all separate applicants before the Public Utilities Commission might allow that to occur.
I happen to think the situation is more favorable than that. The customer is now in charge. The customer has got another option. It's as though a new Lincoln came and freed the slaves. I mean, unplugging is one of the happiest things a customer can do. I've been in the business a long time. Utilities are people you love to hate, for gosh sakes. Now that we've got some companies that are coming along and saying, we can supply your electricity and you can unplug, that is one of the more popular things in America once it's become better and better known. And what we have is a message to the utility industry of America. You've got to get new management in that takes out the old slogan of 50 years ago, which is live better electrically, and get out there and peddle your product and offer your customers what they want. I mean, utility executives keep bragging all the time about customer sensitivity. Well, your customers want solar power and they want efficiency and they want to solve the climate problem. If you don't get on that side of it, you're going to die. So I think this is an exciting time, but we need to help the utilities understand what the new world is all about, which is that they've got to fundamentally change their attitude and embrace the things that they're fighting now, or they're going to die.
So we now have a pile of about 35 really provocative questions that we're going to get through in about 10 minutes. Yeah. No, actually, these are really quite something, and I think we need to figure out a way to make sure these are answered. So here's one for all of you, and John, I'm going to ask you to answer it first. So we have lots of great ideas. Who's going to drive and direct the change? You mentioned earlier the New York example. I presume you were talking about the REV model, which is really being driven by the regulators. So that's one approach. But to this question, who is going to really drive and direct this change? You know,
I'm flexible, I guess is what I would say. it's going to come. It can come from a lot of different places. In New York, it is driven by the regulators. In other states, it's being driven by the legislature, and in other places, you see utilities setting out on their own and providing really interesting models. I think David maybe has made the best point, which is, it's the competition that is going to drive this more than anything. I mean, when you look at utilities in Wisconsin, for example, when they're raising fixed fees, all they're doing in the long run is saying to their customers, we're going to make it as painful as possible to stick with us, so that as soon as you do have a competitive option, you're all going to take it at once. I mean, I look at that and I compare it to my cable company. I don't have a really good choice for a fast internet connection in Minneapolis, which in the 21st century is astonishing. And as soon as I have one, I'm sure as heck I'm going to do it. There was an interview in Utility Dive it was like 6 leaders in the Utility of the Future movement. I remember one of the guys specifically said, utilities of the future are going to be like Comcast and Verizon or something like that. And I said, heaven forfend, that is exactly what we don't want. And so I think it is going to be the fact that we have choices that's really going to drive this.
The environment has driven energy policy for the last 30 years, and it's going to drive it even more. The climate issue with the younger generation is going to drive the future. The public is going to increasingly demand an all-renewable future. It's the only answer we've got. So the utility industry will either adjust to that, or they will pass off the scene the same way that horse and buggies have passed off the scene. It's a question of how long they're going to last, maybe, and that's a question of survival. So we need to recognize that the ability to harness the sun and the wind and bring it directly to a customer without the utility is a mind-boggling, fundamental change in the whole picture. And as people learn, not only that, but this stuff doesn't involve rate increases. I mean, once you hook up for a solar thing, I mean, I've run utilities. I sold electricity in upstate New York for 1 cent a kilowatt hour and made 9 mills on every sale because it was hydropower from a dam that was already paid off. When a solar plant and a wind plant is paid off, the fuel is free. We have invented a better mousetrap, and people will find out about that, and the competitive forces will bring it into being. We're on the verge of great success, but we got to get the current management of the utility industry the hell out of the way.
I think there are a lot of players in this, and I'm happy to see more and more players getting involved. But I think there are 3 major impacts that are happening. One, rooftop solar is extremely popular, and the price is crashing, and the utility is resisting that. And whenever you have friction, you have change. So that's one aspect that is really fundamentally changing everything. A second is that some large corporations are paying astronomical bills. The University of Hawaii at Manoa is paying $34 million a year in electric bills. That's a lot. If it were a corporation, the corporation would be doing everything possible to reduce that. The third is entrepreneurs who are stepping into this and seeing a golden opportunity to change the world, make the world better, and get rich doing it.
So that marketplace, I think, is a really interesting one. We keep using the cell phone example, but it's not the utilities that are creating the apps, right? So they're going to develop the phone. It's the entrepreneurs. It's the third parties that are developing the applications, and they are the ones that are really driving the innovation.
Right. If you look at inverters, which are needed to interface solar onto the grid, and you look at who are the innovators modernizing the inverters, it's not the utilities.
Right. So, David, this is going to come as a shock, but I think you maybe struck a nerve with someone in the audience. This question is for you. So you say you're sick and tired of people living in fear when it comes to the very real threat of massive cyber attacks, yet how is fear of climate change any different? It's still fear.
Climate. This is obviously an intelligent denier who doesn't believe the science. I mean, you either believe the science or you don't. If you believe it, then this is the most awesome threat that we have ever faced. And it is perfectly legitimate to be afraid of something that is really happening. the cyber threat is a threat of a one-time event. The climate is death to the planet. There is a difference.
I'm going to hang around and see how that conversation continues around the coffee a little bit later. John, this one's specifically for you, and I think it's a really very thoughtful question. What 3 strategic milestones do you want NextEra to implement in Hawaii?
That is a good question. I mean, it sort of presumes that I'm okay with continuing a monopoly utility model, but we'll accept that for the time being. I mean, I think where I see the opportunity here, and I think we were kind of addressing this earlier, is, you know, who's going to establish the vision, like a legislature, a regulatory commission, or is it coming from the bottom up from the competition? And, you know, I mentioned before about the competition, but I think there is an important role for a public entity here, whether it's regulators or the legislature, to set what the vision is. And we've been doing that for years with renewable portfolio standards and with other rules at the state level that push our energy in a particular direction. And I think what I would say at this point is, we know what's possible. When we take something like climate change that is a very fact-based and fear-inducing thing, we also have a very hopeful opportunity because we actually have almost all the technology we need to address this. And so when I think about this merger opportunity, or this merger, my first thought is somebody wants something here. And ought to be able to ask them for absolutely everything that you want in return if they think it's a good deal what they're going to get. And so I would say 100% renewable by 2030. And we want to have people to have unlimited opportunities to do the kinds of things like rooftop solar and whatnot that folks see as an opportunity, and that we're going to be amazed at the kind of things that we come up with when we do that. It's just, you know, it's what David mentioned earlier with the utilities and the resistance to putting scrubbers on power plants, saying we don't have any idea how to do this, and the engineers have already come up with the design, and it's a tenth the cost that the utility said it was going to be. So I think we have to dream big, and we have to put, you know, very ambitious and achievable things, requirements on a company that is, you know, I mean, the interest in this is obviously about the financial benefit. I mean, it's all great to talk about the Hawaiian Electric customers, but ultimately they want to do a merger because it's a benefit to their company and their shareholders. And so let's make sure there's a similar public benefit.
All right, so I'm going to do something a little bit different than read another question. What I'm going to ask you 3 to do to maybe kind of wind up this panel, obviously a lot of thought in this room, a lot of good thinkers, but what we want to avoid is being back here next year having the same conversation. So if you want to look out to this audience, and what are some words of wisdom, I guess, or some takeaways, key takeaways that you'd like them to leave this conversation with? Make them actionable. What would you tell these folks in the audience to do so we are not back here having this conversation next year?
I think this year is going to be the year of transformation in Hawaii. There are a number of key dockets before the Public Utilities Commission, including the power supply improvement plans, including interconnection, including decoupling, including net energy metering, and including the merger docket. And there's a record number of players who have intervened, so that there are a large number of players at the table. And the greatest thing that we can do is to present as many ideas through credible, documented evidence, through hard work, through getting it onto the plate, so that the Public Utilities Commission can make a wise decision. And because the deadline is June 3rd of next year, we may have this forum in the closing months of that procedure to allow us to move forward in a way. And so the onus will be on the Public Utilities Commission, the regulators, to take everything that has been put on the table and to figure out where we're going. And so we have something great to look forward to.
David?
I would hope that next year's forum would be that postcard from the future, an all renewable energy economy for Hawaii. We got to go beyond the existing uses of electricity and be talking about how we can take this bountiful sun and wind on this island and show how it can be converted into electricity and possibly hydrogen and meet 100% of the energy needs of this island. That should be the subject of next year's conference. And there ought to be some concrete suggestions how to answer it. And I would add a postscript to your prescription for Next Energy. That should be the challenge that they should commit to in order to acquire Hawaii Electric.
You know, I think, you know, I'll tell a little story of something I've been involved in. You know, I think inspired in part by what has happened in Boulder. In Minneapolis, we've recently had the city sign on to a very novel partnership with both its electric and gas utility, in which the two utilities have publicly committed to helping the city reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So both the gas utility and the electric, which account for about 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions for the entire city of Minneapolis. We didn't think that municipalization was going to be possible, but we knew that we really wanted to have more local control over the energy future for the city. And so my word of advice is leverage, is figure out where you have leverage. In this case, the utilities were having to re-sign 20-year franchise contracts with the city of Minneapolis at the end of 2014. And so during the 2013 municipal election, we worked with a lot of grassroots organizations to make sure that energy was basically on the top of the list of things that folks who wanted to run for office in Minneapolis were going to have to talk about. And that conversation has led us down to this place where we now have a seat at the table with the utilities and talking about these future energy plans and talking about everything from community solar projects to electric vehicles to energy efficiency, very robust energy efficiency and community engagement programs across the city. And I look at that, and that's why, you know, when I talk, you know, several of us have mentioned this merger opportunity. This is leverage. Right now, you have a leverage opportunity where you have somebody who wants something from you, and you have a chance to ask them for absolutely everything that you want. And we've done that in Minneapolis, and we're very hopeful about where it's going to lead and about setting some very ambitious goals. And I think everybody should be looking for those leverage opportunities in their community.
Well, I want to wrap this up by just, again, saying how honored I've been to share the stage with the three of you. I think it's been really interesting to watch this play out, and it's easy sometimes for us to get a little bit paralyzed trying to figure out which path is the right path. But the fact is this is uncharted territory, and we just need to make sure that we are leaning forward, not leaning backward, and onward we go, because this, as David puts it, is really the seminal issue of our time. And I think we keep focused on the opportunities in front of us, and we will get there. I have to believe that every day. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and we'll make them available for your questions.